no funding, completely volunteer driven, no, and because we've got no sponsors and we don't have to sell tickets and that, we can really get a great variety of speakers. We don't censor anyone. We don't have a cancel culture either. So, and what we're also finding is, and I've noticed this, I see more smiles on these calls, especially from the speakers, than anything else. And I think it's because people are coming along for free to share their passion. They're coming along for free to share their passion. It's just amazing. Very relaxed. Formats are very relaxed as well. I think as well in the Zoom context, we're finding new ways to do the medium. So it's, instead of like keynote speeches where you just talk to a room and there's no interaction, I'm seeing more and more interaction. So I'm really loving what we're doing here. And I do encourage you to go to more events. And if you want to help out or do things in the future, the stage is open to everybody. We don't do keynotes. We don't have favorites. Everyone gets advertised. If we did do favorites, then I think I would get my best friend along to talk. My best friend's Sath, and he comes from Edinburgh, and we live quite close to each other. And yeah, Sath and I met a couple of years ago, and we hit it off immediately. We started organizing events and organizing learning. We're both passionate about learning. And when you just meet someone that gets you, tells you when you're wrong, supports you when you're right. That's Sath. That's Sath for me. So Sath's going to talk about social leadership. It's a topic that we talk about a lot. He mentors me in my thinking about the festival and the things that we can do and shouldn't do, and the culture. If you look at a lot of the successful patterns in the festival, they come from Sath. Furthermore, Sath is one of the most intelligent people I know. He builds very inclusive cultures. My pork chops arrived. He's also very accomplished. So he won't tell you this, but he's a fellow of the British Computing Society. He's also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management. He does a lot of service around about various committees, and the fact that he's still there as a friend to me on tap at any point, even with all of the commitments and all of his family commitments as well, is just amazing. Yeah, I love Sath. I've never seen this talk. He keeps sending me when he does do this talk, and I keep saying I'm going to attend. I never do. So today I am going to hand over the floor to my best friend, one of the most accomplished people I know, and one of the most accomplished Scotsmen I know, Sath. Come and tell us about social leadership.
Thanks, Scott. You've built that up now. I'm feeling the pressure. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction, and I'm not sure how to respond to that. To be honest, that was wonderful. But a lot of people have been involved in this, and Scott mentors me too. So it's a peer mentoring friendship we have. I get a lot of support from Scott, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, it's on the pier at Portobello Beach, next to the pub.
So hopefully you can now see my slides. I'm going to put them into presentation mode. Somebody can just confirm that you can indeed see them. That would be good. Fantastic. I see a thumbs up. That's grand. So yeah, Scott says I'm going to be talking about social leadership. I've done this talk a few times. I've done it at a few other conferences earlier this year. I've done it at some other meetups. I'll talk for about 30 minutes, around about that time. It kind of breaks down into 3 parts. So the first part, I'll kind of introduce some management leadership kind of ideas. Many of them you'll have heard before. It's just kind of a context setter. And then I'll actually introduce social leadership. I'll be talking about the social age, and also be talking about something called the NET model. And in part 3, I try to bring that all to life with some real world examples of how I've applied some of these ideas. And as I go, I'll be explaining the journey that I've been on. But just to get us started, my slides will actually work. So Scott's just gave me a kind of a wonderful introduction there. So one of the things I like to do is I like to do visualization. So, you know, I'm very passionate about visual storytelling, amongst various other things. And this visual kind of captures my career, if you will, in this sort of journey metaphor. I'm not going to go through it all because we've got lots of other interesting things to cover rather than talk about me. But the fact that I've got kind of formal on one side and social on the other side is kind of interesting and relevant and kind of quite fortuitous, because I didn't create this visual for this particular talk. I just managed to happen to make some use of it. So it's great to have some reuse there. So just very quickly, so my background is predominantly technology. I started off as a software engineer, you know, some years ago, longer than I care to remember. And I just kind of progressed through, you know, from hands-on roles into management, leadership roles. As Scott mentioned, I'm kind of active in the professional bodies in the UK. So that's on the kind of formal side of things. At the British Computer Society, they're the industry body for IT, as well as the Chartered Management Institute, who are the UK's body for some management leadership. And I am a fellow of both. And my kind of technology work also took me into Agile in many different forms. I actually started my career using XP over 20 years ago. That was very interesting to get that early exposure. And really right now I kind of sit at the sort of intersection of engineering and agile, which I'll come back to in part 3. On the left-hand side, yeah, so I'm involved in lots of sort of voluntary roles. Scott mentioned there. Scott and I are both kind of active in the Scottish sort of meetup community organisers. I'm the kind of lead organiser of Future Scotland, which I actually inherited from Scott. And I don't know if you can see at the top there, yeah, Agile 20 Reflect, which many of you will remember was the festival we did back in February, which kind of from which Access Agile emerged. So a few things there, a little bit about me. So just to get us started then, I'm very interested to start with what's management versus leadership. Again, people have different views. I'm always very interested to hear people's perspectives. And as part of this particular talk, it's quite important to start here. Very important. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you the opportunity to kind of give me your thoughts. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're happy to do so, just drop it in the chat. What do you think is the difference in your mind through your own experiences between management and leadership? And then I will give you my perspective. Just maybe 30 seconds or so. If you're happy to do so, drop something in the chat. Every time I've done this talk, I've always seen some quite interesting things get added in, which is kind of nice. So just see what I'm interested to see what you all think. Any thoughts? Any ideas? Oh, some stuff coming in now. Oh, it flashed past quickly there. Let me just take a look at that. It's top down, leadership is nice. Okay, management's control, telling folks what to do. Wow, okay. Inspiring people follow leaders, right? That's a nice thought there, Jackie. We'll definitely be coming back to that. Management is like telling leadership. Thank you for that. Louise, your management people are responsible. Yep. You can lead people. Excellent. Alberto, management. Nice. Some nice ideas there. I like that. Thank you for that. Let me just close my chat. Right. So when I was studying the chartered management program, so I did that in 2015 through the CMI. I was reading the literature and I came across these ideas, which I thought was wonderful, and I've continued to use them in my own journey and certainly in my mentoring and coaching. So management. Some of you touched on it there in your responses in the chat. Looking at the operational side of things, process-driven, making sure things work well, doing things right. Compare and contrast that to leadership, doing the right things. Kind of like this sort of contrast in these statements. So, and really leadership is about trying to do the right things. And I think good leaders will focus on that. I also like the fact that these two statements are very succinct. They're quite nice and they're kind of complementary, but they give you a nice subtle distinct difference between the two because they are not the same, as we know. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into that quickly. So this is a definition I came across that, again, I really, really like. So to influence, inspire, and help others become their best selves, building their skills and achieving their goals along the way. Now, I've deliberately highlighted some keywords there in red because they really resonate with me. They speak to me in terms of what I think is key to good leadership, and I think what leaders should be focused on. So having that ability to really influence and be a compelling force on helping others, and building ideas, moving things forward, providing that support, inspiring. Great leaders are always inspirational, aren't they? Look to them, they create great visions, right? Just exactly as Scott had done with Agile 20 Reflect. Helping others, very important, being supportive, extending up that hand and helping others along with their own journey. Building, you're still very much creating. I like that kind of art and act of construction. Any of you maybe in the call are working with product owners, creating product-centric kind of tools, etc., thinking in a product-centric way. We build, we create, don't we? As humans, we're creative in our nature. And achieving things, it's not always easy to achieve your goals. Usually more often than not, you're having to overcome great hurdles and difficulties and challenges. And leadership tends to kind of support in that if it's good forms of leadership. So just some thoughts there. There are many styles and forms of leadership. I'm sure you'll absolutely agree with that. And I'm only touching on 4 here that are resonate with me, ones that I've experienced, and some that I'm going to go on to talk about in the remainder of this talk. I'm sure you can think of many others, and I'd be interested in your thoughts after the session. At the end of my talk, when we go into the Q&A. So just starting quickly in the top right there. So situational leadership, quite an older form of leadership now, perhaps traditional in some ways, dates back to the mid-60s, the sort of early 70s. And Hershey and Blanchard, when they'd introduced this, they were very focused on this idea that, leadership forms, one size doesn't fit all, right? So you can see there, you've got kind of different quadrants there in the two by two. So you might have sort of supportive styles versus kind of delegating. You might, for some reason, need to provide more of a directive style. And ideally, in the top right, you would maybe adopt more of a coaching style. And they coined the phrase task relevant. So back then, they were talking about this idea that, you need to kind of apply the techniques that are relevant to the task at hand, which I think is still relevant today. In the bottom left there, a quote I absolutely love. Good leaders must first become good servants. Wow, what a great quote that is, and very, very relevant. And again, many of you in the call here in the Agile communities, perhaps Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, you might recognize this name. This is indeed Robert Greenleaf, who is the author of the original Servant Leadership book. And that dates again back to the sort of 70s, late 70s, right about the time I was born, no doubt. And that was kind of introduced at the time when there was that paradigm shift in management, in a lot of boardrooms and corporate organizations, corporate offices in the United States. Then we start to move into some newer sort of forms and styles of leadership. So the top left there, quiet leadership. So I was lucky enough to undertake a program focused on this for a period of 4 weeks with a gentleman called Julian Stodd, who's a kind of thought leader in storytelling, community building, and social leadership, no less. And a lot of my talk is based on his great work. He's a great inspiration to me. And it talks about ideas like humility, and leaders being humble, kindness, kind of, caring, being fair, supporting, grace, how leaders sort of carry themselves. And these are much newer ideas and not as common in older traditional forms of leadership. And then in the bottom left, we start to look at social leadership, and that's a visual of the net model. And in the second part of this talk, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about some of the ideas that make up this particular model. So just really to introduce some of these styles, again, as I say, you're probably familiar with them. You've perhaps heard of some of the older ones. I'm sure there's other ones that you can think of yourself, and we can discuss them at the end. So from there, formal versus social. So you'll cast your mind back to the visual, and I was talking about formal versus social on those two signposts. Now, I'm a great film fan. I love films. I watch a lot of films. If I get an opportunity to weave a film reference or a quote into a talk, I'll normally seize the opportunity. So Just out of interest, for a bit of fun, does anybody recognise this film? Feel free to unmute and shout out. And for a bonus point, can you name this fictional, menacing military figure?
It's A Few Good Men.
Fantastic. Character, do you know who it is?
Oh no, I can't remember the character, but I know the film.
I did do this talk recently, Agile Boston, and somebody actually named the character. So this is Colonel Nathan Jessup. He was a very senior figure in the kind of operation that he was running out at Guantanamo Bay in A Few Good Men.
Sath, I just want to say, you may have broken our code of conduct with stressing A Few Good Men. I think we need to be more inclusive.
It's the name of a film. So now the point here is that form of leadership in sort of traditional hierarchical kind of environments like those sorts of military operations, this type of leadership is sort of leadership and authority that is granted. So it's kind of very much more sort of positional authority. So this character and others often have that type of leadership because they're in a certain senior position and authority is granted. And that's quite an important concept. So contrast that to this social sort of authority. So this is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., who was a sort of leading spokesperson in the civil rights movement back in the 50s and 60s in the United States. And he was very sort of formidable. He had great influence. But interestingly, he didn't actually have any formal authority. A lot of his authority came from the power of his communication and his reputation that grew through the work that he did. And that's kind of an important concept. So do hold that thought. But was he a social leader? So let's take a look at social leadership. Before we can do that and explore some of the characteristics and behaviours of social leaders. What do social leaders look like? What are their characteristics and behaviours? But before we can do that, we need to take a look at the social age, because the social age gives us that context. So what I mean by the social age. So social age is the era we're in now, right? We're in this era right now. So how did we get to this era? So the whole idea is that if you cast your mind back, we started, so think about something like the manufacturing age. So that was kind of age when society was very focused on construction and building. You know, that was the focus. Humans built things, they created things. And from there, we moved more into like a knowledge age. So knowledge age was much more about the importance of knowledge. Knowledge matter. Knowledge was gained. That was the focus. And that really was when kind of, you know, academic institutions were really sort of prevalent, and that sort of was very prominent in society. From there, we moved into the digital age. That was really when obviously technology became much more ubiquitous. You know, there was the dawn of the internet, we had the web, Google, and, you know, we went from PCs and desktops to having, you know, that type of power and much more powerful computers in our pockets with smartphones. That's the kind of shift we'd seen. So technology was very, very important. That was at the heart of the digital age. And at that point, there was this kind of idea that the digital age, that was it, we'd reached it, we were here, that was it, but it wasn't the end. So interestingly, from the digital age, we kind of emerged into what we call the social age, which is where we are now. Now, what's interesting here is the social age is this idea that, you know, okay, we've got knowledge, we've gained knowledge, and we have technology, and technology is ubiquitous, and it's a facilitator and enabler for a lot of things. But actually, it's the social age where we're focusing much more on not just the knowledge, because acquiring knowledge and obtaining knowledge has become much easier. This is much more about how we actually derive meaning from that knowledge. How do we create that sense of meaning? And really, that's at the heart of what the social age is about. Through the social age, in this era we're in now, life and work have changed drastically, right? And that kind of goes without saying. So we're in an age now where we can literally work from anywhere. Even over the last 18 months, through the global pandemic, we've seen that shift from, you know, co-located to distributed, right through to dispersed. And of course, now what are we doing? We're having conversations about hybrid working and then people going back to offices, etc. And then we're starting to see things like the Great Resignation that's happened, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world. But interestingly, alongside that, social age has brought about the idea of democratized communication, right? So that's become much easier, right? We're sort of got liberated communication. It's easy to communicate and we can share ideas very readily through technology, right? But also, a lot of that has also given us rise to the way that we interact with one another, how relationships are constructed, and this idea of a social contract. So that shift we've seen now, the relationship between, for example, employees and employers has changed drastically. It's different to how it was in generations gone by, where we had concepts like, jobs for life. You did one job, you worked in one place, that was it. You worked your way through the organization, you got promoted, you retired, that was it, you got your pension. That shifted drastically. And if you look at kind of what millennials are now expecting, the generations coming through, their relationship with their organizations is very different. Very, very different. And their expectations of their employers are different. When I talked earlier about quiet leadership, there's a real linkage there between the behaviours that leaders are now both exhibiting and are also expected to exhibit by the newer generations coming through. Their expectations of their employers are very, very different. And the idea of social capital, so building that social capital, which is really key to thriving and succeeding in the social age. And it's a social age that has given rise to a social leader. So leaders who are exhibiting a different set of behaviours and value a different set of ideas. So alongside that, that's given rise also to greater social learning. So social learning that is much more around collaboration and deriving meaning. And that's done by taking these ideas into communities. So we've also seen a greater sense of communities and communities growing and being nurtured. And all these ideas are linked. So that's the social age. So with that, we've got this idea of the social leader. So a moment ago, I talked about the fact that the social age has given rise to the social leader. It's what do social leaders look like? So here's some of the characteristics. I mentioned earlier, social capital. The social leader has high social capital, understands the importance and value of relationships, how to build them, how to maintain them, looking at what is of value. They focus a lot on the values, as do those who are looking for things from their leaders. These types of leaders will definitely likely exhibit those behaviours. Oh, the lights just went out. Exhibit those behaviours that I talked about earlier on the quiet leadership, those different dimensions, kindness, humility, fairness, very, very keen to actually be fair, striving for equality, showing great humility, grace, how they carry us. They're much more self-aware and keen to constantly be learning. And a lot of their authority, we talked earlier about the different types of leadership when I was talking about Colonel Jessup and Martin Luther King Jr. The way in which they build their reputations is not based on authority. It's not authority-based leadership or reputation. They tend to be much more collaborative in nature. So that's very important to them. And they want to nurture and develop communities. They see communities as a very powerful construct. And as I mentioned, they're very keen to focus on fairness, equality. They really value these ideas in the broader sense in society. They want to create spaces. So earlier at the start, Scott was talking about some other events that he was at earlier where people were facilitating well and creating that space. And it's within those spaces that we can truly see that type of social learning. And the storytellers, they understand the power of stories and narrative and sharing ideas. And we'll be coming back to some of that shortly. And critically, I think somebody mentioned it in the chat actually, when we were talking earlier about management versus leadership, social leaders are very committed to developing other leaders. Very important ideas. Those are some of the characteristics and behaviours of social leaders. So in the context of organizations, so we talk a lot about social businesses, social enterprise. Social leaders help make organizations more agile. How do they do that? Well, social leaders question things, they challenge, they don't settle for the status quo. Social leaders believe, they'll look at something and think, just because we did it that way yesterday, doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it tomorrow. They will question, and they will question in a very constructive and respectful manner, but they will not just take the status quo. They will want to look at how things continue to evolve. And that's an idea that I'm sure many of you are familiar if you think about the ideas of continuous improvement. Social leaders are definitely committed to that type of idea, and they're the ones who are really trying to help organizations kind of move and continue to evolve and emerge and reinvent themselves. So lastly, just before we move on to some real world example. So the net model. So I've talked there about the idea of the social age, the context and the era that we're in now. We've talked about social leadership and the emergence of social leaders through the social age. It's the social age that's given rise to them. And we've also talked about the different characteristics and behaviours. Now, while I was studying this style and form of leadership, I came by the net model. So the net model I think is absolutely wonderful, and this was created by Julian Stodd, I mentioned earlier, and it's his work that this talk is based upon. And Julian was a kind of guest speaker at my own meetups in 2022, and I've kind of been following his work ever since. And this net model I think is fantastic, because what this model does is it actually helps leaders go on that journey of developing social leadership skills and behaviours. And if you look at the very kind of sort of cyclical nature of it, the idea is you're moving across these different dimensions. It gets its name from the three core dimensions of narrative, engagement, and technology. That's where its name comes from, and they're key to this. Within each dimension, there are three components, and within those components, there are other key aspects, which I don't have time to get into in this talk, but I'll share some resources where you can get more information if you want to learn more about this. So the idea here is you start with narrative. So we start with narrative, and the whole idea is within the narrative, you're very focused on creation ideas. It's a great focus on storytelling. I mentioned that earlier, so we cast our mind back to when I was talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and creating a strong narrative, expressing those stories, creating those stories, and sharing those stories. So if you follow it right, where do the stories go? Often social leaders are trying to push those stories move those stories into different groups and different communities. And it's in those communities that they socialize their ideas. And often it's in those communities, they're informal structures, aren't they? Often, if you think about communities of practice, they're not formal structures often. And it's in those communities that you often surface best ideas, because that's often where perhaps the unheard voices are. And again, by doing that and building those relationships in those communities, what often happens is reputation grows, those ideas grows, they build up, people start to understand where the social leaders are trying to go with this stuff. And through that, they build authority. But again, it's not authority through power, it's authority that's built through reputation. And what's interesting here is the social leader is not actually interested in authority. It's not something they crave. They build it through the reputation of the power of their messaging. And then they use it as a means to an end to achieve some other greater goal. But again, technology is key. So we talked earlier about the shift from the digital age into the social age. And it's the technology that facilitates that. It's through the technology that they're able to truly co-create, especially in global environments and distributed teams. They really have to adopt and be high in social capital to build reputations, to build relationships. And then a lot of that's all successful, can only be successful with collaboration. So it's a quite nice, powerful ideas there. So again, I'm only introducing it in this session. You're welcome to go and learn a little bit more about this particular model. I think it's fantastic. And it really helped me to understand the journey that the social leader would likely go on and the different aspects of that. So having said all that, what might this look like in reality? So I've actually been applying and adopting some of these ideas in my work, in my day job. So as I mentioned earlier, I sit at the intersection of Agile and engineering. In the day job, I'm sort of in technology leadership, involved in a lot of initiatives that are very focused on people and culture and communities. And one of the things I've been doing is I've been embedding, mobilizing and socializing a technology platform, which is very much built around Q&A. It's a Q&A platform. In my organization, which is a global bank, it's NatWest Group, that's some financial services, and I'm based out in Scotland. We have kind of offices all over the place. But the interesting thing is it's a large enterprise, and the engineering community that I'm working with consists of thousands and thousands of engineers across very different domains and franchises, And the culture and the ways of working in these groups is quite different. It's quite different. So what did that look like then? So one of the things that we're doing quite early on is this whole initiative that I'm the lead of. I'm the community lead and product owner, this particular initiative, centered around the idea of questions. That was important because what do engineers do? Technical professionals, the knowledge workers, the problem solvers, and every day they encounter problems. They hit technical roadblocks. So they need to get unblocked as quickly as they can so that they can continue to, push out their changes and support, product releases, right? That was kind of where we started. So for me, that was very much at the heart of the narrative. So with that, what we're trying to do is through introducing this particular technology platform, we're trying to shift away from this type of traditional model where engineers have questions, they have problems, and they reach out to multiple sources, don't they? They might look through their old emails, they can chat to other subject matter experts on their chat systems, their IM systems, and they might go and look at the documentation, but they might not be able to unlock the answers. That's a labor-intensive and decentralized approach. So what we're looking to do is make a shift to more of this type of model, which is much more around crowdsourcing an answer. So being able to reach a group of SMEs that want a community of subject matter experts who can actually support you and help you get the answers to the problem so you can move forward. And it's about optimizing the flow of information and communication. So that's really was at the heart of the narrative. So we talked earlier about narrative and the importance of creating that compelling narrative and getting that into the communities. So you're probably starting to see some of the linkages with these ideas. Now, the net model talks a lot about 6 tenets. Julian talks about 6 tenets. I see them as principles. And these principles are nice and quite key to success in adopting these types of principles and making a success of some of the ideas that social leadership advocates. So these, as you can see there, are being curious, try and learn, try, sharing, being humble, telling stories. So cast your mind back, we already covered that, and being fair and protect. So if you think about what we're talking about right at the start, there's a lot of linkage between a lot of these ideas and some of the leadership behaviours we talked about, like quiet leadership and some of the other stuff I touched on earlier. So what I did when I was reflecting all of this, because when I was learning this stuff, I was new to it, and I was actually working through the initiative, communicating ideas, building communities in this large organisation, which was thousands and thousands of engineers. But I was going through Julian's sort of storytelling program. It was at the time we were learning some of these social leadership ideas, and I started to see the linkages. I started to see the commonalities around what I was doing and some of the stuff I was learning in this theory, and I was fascinated by the linkages. And then it helped me to actually go away and learn more and bring back some of these ideas into this initiative that I was kind of working on in the day job. And I kind of felt privileged to actually have this opportunity. So what I did is when I started to reflect on it, I tried to map some of the things we were doing onto these tenets. So when I was thinking about curiosity, when we started this initiative, it was a very new sort of concept in the bank. We didn't really know kind of how these things were going to go, but I was very keen to kind of go on this journey, encourage other people to get involved and go on this journey, be very exploratory about it in nature, and try to encourage to be open, encourage the community to be open, encourage our leadership to be open, and have a willingness to question and challenge. So you remember earlier I was talking about social leaders and their focus on challenging the status quo. Try, learn, try. So, similar to test and learn. A lot of us are more familiar with these ideas now. Organizations are really embracing them. And again, it's all about experimentation. This was a new platform, trying to find ways that we could surface problem statements that could actually benefit from this particular platform. Looking at new ways to create new ideas around collaboration, that we share and how engineers sort of support one another. That created a vision around that, around creating this global supportive community. And again, the sharing is very, very important, how we communicate. We were talking earlier about narrative and getting these ideas out there. Julian has this wonderful idea where he talks about working out loud, and he's got an excellent blog. I would really recommend it. And in that, what he's doing is he's actually sharing ideas very, very early on, when they're not even particularly well formed, and he's opening them up to scrutiny. But again, it's a very deliberate sort of approach. And by doing so, he's kind of welcoming others in sharing these ideas, to support these ideas and help him further these ideas and help new things emerge. I think it's a very important idea, and again, something that social leaders really advocate for. Again, we've already talked about being humble, quiet leadership, humility. We don't have all the answers often. In this particular initiative, we really didn't. I didn't. I spent a lot of time kind of just feeling my way through things, but I was very open to explaining that, look, that's kind of where we are. This is what we're trying to do. Do please share your thoughts. You know, we're communicating regularly. I was talking earlier about sharing, sending out regular weekly communications in this initiative. We've created drop-in sessions. We run regular focus groups to get both qualitative feedback from those sessions as well as quantitative feedback, which we get through the data and the metrics within the platform. And we've also been trying to really get that value from the community, but give value. But by opening up the conversation and inviting them in and having exploratory conversations, we've been able to do that. And the key part of it has been telling stories throughout, creating narratives, refining the narrative and looking for the opportunities, trying to surface the benefits, sharing the benefits, trying to help others surface the good news stories. So when I'm sending out these communications, every week we're celebrating successes. You know, what great contributions have we seen on the platform? What teams and areas of the business have actually made a success of it and have maybe found new ways of working, new ways of doing things, both through the community and the technology itself. To think again about the net model. And again, trying to do things fairly, openly. We want it to be inclusive, much like this festival. We're opening it up, wanted every area of technology and engineering to be represented. All groups, we have a breadth of technologies across the bank, and creating those open spaces through which they can get involved. And these things don't sit with one individual. Although I'm the community lead of this particular initiative, I've got a network of people that I've built up throughout the pilot and going beyond that. And they're local community managers who are helping socialize these ideas within their own areas where they are the SMEs. So not dissimilar to the ambassador and network that we had in Agile 20 Reflect back in February, if that was something you were kind of something you experienced. So it does never sit with one person. It's reliant on individuals coming together, building consensus, sharing ideas, being open to collaboration and going on that exploratory journey. So these reflections were kind of quite nice and interesting and important to me. So just some final thoughts around that, because I'm very keen to hear your thoughts, and I appreciate I've covered quite a lot of stuff in a short space of time. So just to wrap up here, social age is here now. We really need to embrace it. Of course, we'll probably emerge into something else, won't we? We talked earlier about shifting from manufacturing to knowledge, to digital, to social. Something else is going to come later. What is it? I'm not a futurist, I don't know. We embrace where we are now because it's very relevant. And the social age is very much about the fact that, you know what, we appreciate and embrace the fact that change is here and it's constant. Earlier on in the session, I outlined some other sort of leadership styles. Leadership styles will continue to evolve. The ones I talked there kind of date back 3-4 decades in some cases. New ones will continue to emerge. Social leadership is important now. It's likely to kind of become something else later if a need arises. The other thing that's really important here is I talked earlier about formal versus social. Now, formal leadership is always going to be required in organizations. I'd like to reduce those hierarchies. I'm sure most of you would kind of agree and embrace that. There's always going to be a role for it. But where formal leadership doesn't work, and we would certainly like to complement that with social leadership, because that's there to subvert formal where formal doesn't work. And often formal doesn't. More and more, if you think about the environments we're in, some of the things I talked about in terms of culture, social contracts, social leadership helps us really kind of link with that and get the benefits we want. And the social spaces are key. Creating those social spaces is really, really, really important. And that's where the magic happens. That's where we surface the new ideas, the great ideas. It's through those social spaces that we see emergence. And again, bringing all that together is through that kind of narrative, creating that strong narrative, storytelling, being open to sharing, welcoming new ideas, and doing it in a human-centered way. So again, that comes back to these ideas of the social contract. So that's my kind of key takeaways there. So maybe something for yourselves, just to kind of close. What are your own thoughts on social leadership? What are your own thoughts on the social age? What are your own reflections on it? Do you think you exhibit social leadership behaviours? Or perhaps you can think of good examples of social leaders within your own organisations, or the communities in which you live. Just some things there to take away. I always like to finish with a nice quote. And again, from a famous great social leader, and this is, of course, Mahatma Gandhi. It was Gandhi that said, "A sign of a good leader is not how many followers you have, how many leaders you can create." And again, I touched on that earlier when I talked about social leaders really wanting to be committed to creating other leaders. And just to close out, here's some other reading that you might be interested in. Links quite heavily to some of what I've covered today. I appreciate I've touched on a lot of ideas. I've only scratched the surface. If you want to read more about social leadership, I thoroughly recommend the Social Leadership Handbook. Julian Stodd, who's a thought leader in this space, I'm a big fan of his work. It's inspired me greatly, and this talk is very heavily based on his book. I'm sure many of you are fans of Brené Brown, as am I. I think some of these ideas are touched on in Dare to Lead, another great book. In Dare to Lead, Brené's talking a lot about courageous leadership. It's a lot of talk about, vulnerability, leaders showing greater vulnerability, and also, again, how we collaborate now in this kind of new age. And of course, the Servant Leadership seminal text back from the 70s by Robert Greenleaf, which I touched on earlier. 3 books that I think are very relevant to what I've covered today, and go into a lot more detail than I can possibly cover in just 30, 40 minutes. I think that I'm coming to the end now, so I hope that was of interest to you and gave you some ideas and thoughts. I'm going to open up for Q&A in a second. If you'd like to stay in touch with me, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm active on all these channels. Welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to see more of my visual work, you'll find that on my Instagram feed on Visual Sath. I'm active on Twitter if that's your thing. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm one of the organisers of Future Work Scotland. If you want to join some of our future events, you're more than welcome to do so. You'll find us in Meetup. And with that, I think...
Well done, Sath. Thank you very much.
Open up to questions.
Yeah. One thing, there was a book missing in the books that I think you should... Yeah, it's your book. When's it coming out?
Very good, Scott. They were the only thing I could fit into that. And yes, if you say so, in my copious amounts of spare time. Yeah. I'm keen to hear from you guys, because every time I've done this talk, Q&As have been really, really interesting and thought-provoking. And they've always surfaced different things in every group. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm keen to hear what you think.
Just a quick clarification question. Everything we've got goes onto a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Access Agile Learning, and these videos will be uploaded, and they'll go to Access Agile Learning, and I'm pretty sure Mao will drop it in the chat, the link to it. We've got a lot of the talks from February. Sath and Joanna and people did great talks in February. One thing I'm looking for ideas from everyone is how we promote that more. We've set up a great free resource for the world, but I don't think the world knows about it. So, learning pathways, promotion on that would be absolutely wonderful. Okay, so any questions for Sath? Hard questions would be good, and ones you can't answer are even better, because then I can get a laugh.
Absolutely. Hi,
Andrew.
Okay. I agree with the model you propose or what you are studying. I also started to study about servant leadership, and is some a similarity, because I wrote about that Monday in my LinkedIn, because I am trying to understand more about these kind of things in leadership. But something that I found something difficult to apply these kind of things is when you work in an agile team, people want more efficacy or deliverables, and every opportunity to talk or do different kind of things is a waste of time for them. And if you want to prepare a leader, you need time to talk with them. And also know better people, talk about their life, their family or something like that, and that is not productive. How do you think you can handle that kind of things and be a good leader and also a productive leader?
Wow, nice. Yeah, there's quite a lot in that. I think with a lot of these things, there's always a balance to be struck. I know it sounds a bit cliched. I think you can be both, and I think, well, certainly in agile ways of working, I think a lot of the time we talk about empowerment, but if you truly can empower your teams, you will get the outcomes you're looking for. But so I talked earlier about narrative, right? This came up earlier in my work, actually, in a meeting, and I think one of the most important things leaders need to do is create a compelling vision and then share that vision. And a lot of that's about the storytelling I was talking about, creating the right narrative, sharing that narrative, and also being open to that narrative being challenged or questioned or it evolving. So I think there's a lot of commonality between a lot of the work that many of us do in these very sort of community spaces. So Scott and I talk about this sort of stuff quite a lot, because there are a lot of ideas that you bring to life when you're, running meetups from communities. But I think what's fascinating is, and you're right, it's trying to take those ideas back into formal hierarchical structures is really, really difficult. And that's why, the case study that I kind of just explained is fascinating to me, because I've been living and breathing that. And I faced a lot of challenges, growing a large community across, that type of enterprise where there are lots of formal constructs. But it is about balance. But it's also about other things that, I'm not talking about here that I think we all need. And that's, tenacity, perseverance, accepting that one day you're going to have some failures. Things might not go well, but you get up again, don't you? And you have another go and you try something different and you learn from it. And I think these sorts of very real human behaviors, they don't just apply in, these spaces, they don't just apply in work, they apply in life. And I guess the other last point I would make, and I never covered it off, but it has come up in some of these sessions when I've done them before, is leaders can come from anywhere and everywhere. So traditionally in those sorts of formal organizations, when I was jokingly talking about, the film character, these are hierarchical structures, big hierarchical structures, leaders. In the past, we had this very fixed view of what a leader was, right? That's changed. You can be a leader at any part of an organization if you demonstrate the right behaviors and people believe in what you're saying and you're trying to do the right things in the right way. Remember when I was talking about management versus leadership? Leadership's about doing the right thing. Anybody who's compelled to do so can do the right thing if they choose to. And if they do it, the likelihood is they will demonstrate leadership behaviors and others will follow what they're doing. I think that's I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's some related thoughts. Yeah, against leadership. Did that help?
In part, obviously, Tennessee could in the future give some results. At the beginning, probably you need to consider that time. It's more because the model say, okay, you have block times. And how do you use your time blocks? Sorry, time blocks. And you have that to work. And if you take one person to talk about different things, you are taking one of those blocks. But obviously, this is more important. A person without the focus of the idea probably could do bad things and could failure in their tasks. And I consider what you say very important.
Okay. I see you put in the chat there, leadership equals power, ? So that's an excellent statement. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier. And I was deliberately talking about that because, again, in the formal formal hierarchical structures, authority was granted. Remember when I was talking about that right at the start? Authority is granted, and with that came power. Now, power is a really challenging sort of concept, isn't it? But again, in the social leadership context, social leaders don't actually want power. It's not power that motivates them. What motivates them is some cause, some goal, some vision, something they're trying to achieve, which usually has a much more centered human focus. But they will use the power that they gain, and they gain that through reputation. Remember when I was talking about the net model and I was walking through that model? That's why I'm such a fan of that model, because I think the model does a great job of showing you how you kind of how it evolves. And it's, I mean, these ideas to me are so powerful, so relevant. I don't think they've ever been more relevant, but I think we're still having to work very hard to see them gain traction in the workplace. And this is why I do this talk.
Wow. Thanks a lot.
Any more questions? Good, great, excellent question though, Alejandro.
Yeah, every time I've done it, there's been a lot of good stuff comes up, because it's quite a lot of broad things I'm covering. It's a broad spectrum of stuff. Now, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I've done I've studied the quiet leadership stuff with Julian. I've done the storytelling things. They're kind of fairly big topics in their own right. Even servant leadership, I touched on it. Louise.
I was just wondering whether, like, the social aspect was actually negative for a lot of leaders.
Exactly.
Because you know, I mean, typically quite a lot of executives, there's a reason why they have private coaches. It's because they don't want to be exposed to other people to make for weaknesses. So although like more leaders are sharing more of themselves, it's still quite scary when mostly you don't want to have to interact with people if you can help it.
Yeah, and that brings up other ideas, doesn't it? So we talk a lot about authentic leaders, right? Authenticity. Again, Scott and I talk about it a lot, and it's to say it's the related ideas, you know. So again, social leaders will, you know, we talked about humility, right? These sorts of behaviors, these were not ideas we used to associate in the past with leaders. But again, when I was talking about communities and people sharing, that's all deliberately something that the social leaders do. They take it into informal spaces, right? Because you can share formal messages, but if you take it into informal spaces, you'll get something very different and something very valuable from those spaces, a different set of insights. That's what this stuff is about. Yeah, it's complementing formal and social. And you need both, but as you say, those who are more wedded to like command and control and more formal structures, I think these ideas are very foreign to them. Not one, perhaps even make them uncomfortable.
Sheila has a hand up. Patiently.
Yeah, I wonder how this relates to, in a lot of organizations, you have administrative managers. Actually, I've talked to some people in organizations where all they do is administratively manage huge teams where they're not really doing anything but allocating them. And then there's matrix management. And I'm wondering how that relates to what we're talking about with social leadership. Because a lot of times that's all you have when you're a matrix manager and your whole team is matrixed.
Yeah.
But I also have a concern with that, because a lot of times when you're doing that kind of thing, they'll have someone do it as a leader where they're undervalued and underpaid, and management has no incentive to promote them and pay them appropriately. And I'm wondering if that's the way some management is going to see social leadership, as just another excuse to continue that, where it's like, well, you're doing it anyway, so why should we promote you? Or why should we pay you more? It's part of your job now and you're doing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. So I think, yeah, It's a good one. So I think on that one, so I guess one of the things I didn't touch on, but it's related, is so if you think about drive, so Daniel Pink's book, and sort of the intrinsic motivators that he's talking about. So some of those relate to what we're talking about here, right? So what motivates us? So what's interesting for me, and I guess I didn't touch on this, is so that initiative that I've been leading and the work I've been doing in that sort of leadership capacity is quite different to some of other previous leadership roles that I've had that were more formal roles. And I did have, you know, operations to look after and hierarchies of people, you know, under me. Again, sounds like a terrible way to phrase it. And here, I don't have any formal authority over these networks of people that I'm working with. So again, a lot of the work has been through storytelling, the communication, the creation of that narrative, creating spaces in which to collaborate, right? So it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about. And you know what? I really enjoy it. It's challenging. To begin with, I wasn't really sure, you know, how well it was going to kind of unfold and evolve in such an organization. Louise and I work in the same organization, so Louise knows what I mean. Yeah, it's challenging, but I've enjoyed the fact that I have no formal authority, and I'm actually drawing upon a different skill set. And when I was studying this stuff, first it didn't occur to me. It was only when I started to make the connections, I realized, I go, right, okay, so, and this stuff works, but it works in a different way, and you've got to think about how it's the application of it. So it's the beauty of not having formal authority, frankly.
You've reminded me of a story that I want to do. Mo, can I tell the story before you come in, because it links to Sheila's?
Of course.
Right. Many years ago in the NHS, okay, I got asked to fix some of the implementations that were happening around about the country between Fujitsu and the big suppliers. And I pulled together a multidisciplinary team from all the departments that wanted to work with me. And we went around the country fixing things. It was like Robin Hood and the Merry Men. Anywhere I went, I always had a specialist. I left, and as I left, I was handing over to my new boss. And he took me into the office and he went, "You're handing over?" And I went, "Yeah, well, I'm leaving." He said, "Okay. There's a mistake here." He said, "What?" Said, "You've only got 1.5 FTE, and you're the one." And I went, "Yeah." He said, "So what about all these people that have been doing all the shows around the country?" I said, "Yeah, they just help." And he was like, "Will they be continuing when you go?" And I'm like, "Well, I think you'd have to ask them." and that's what you can do with just a 0.5 FTE. You can put a 15-man task force to go around the country. If you can actually, and that was the biggest impact task force the organization had. So I think to Sheila's point, we got lots of kudos. Little thing that not a lot of people know is nobody ever queried our expenses, which is like the biggest in government. That's the biggest accolade you can ever have. You know, no one ever said, "Why are they in the first class carriage?" Yeah. So yeah. That I think in an organization, if you're making that impact, it gets noticed. It might be threatening to some people, but it will get noticed. Usually at the top of the pyramid, who want results. Sorry, bad cheering. You know, cheering, prioritizing myself. You know, leaders eat last. Sorry, Mo. And follow that.
And now that we're finishing, so no, but just to be respectful for everyone's time, I just like to thank Sath. Just one really quick question: what to do when you find someone, because sometimes you want to empower people to be leaders, to be even if the worst part is when they are managers and you want them to take that responsibility and they give you this kind of responses. Because one time I got the response, I was trying to empower a team, just like self-manage, be leaders, all of that. And I got an answer that I never gonna forget. They told me, "They don't pay me to think." And
Wow.
yeah, I know. So what to do in like the kind of status quo for the people that are nice without being leaders, or they don't want to take the extra responsibility. They think that if they do, they're gonna I don't know, have some political challenge to their boss, or they want to, or if they take their responsibility, they're going to have the accountability to bring more results, and they don't want that, or they're just happy to only be followers. How to deal with the I don't want, they don't pay me to think kind of people.
I'll answer that question very easily.
Whilst you're doing that, Mao,
It's magic. It's magic. What? It's magic. What Amazon does now. Paid to think. Okay.
We're all paid to think. Okay.
Mao, can I just clarify? I don't pay you to think. You do all your thinking for free.
You don't pay me.
Well, okay. Well, that's another interesting, relevant point, right? Just before we close off. So, Access Agile. I just try to reflect the work I do in my own meetup, Future Work Scotland, the work Scott does in the Scottish community. We're volunteers. We give our time. Why would you do that? Because of sense of purpose. Right? We're motivated by different things. We never get paid. The hours Scott and I did in February, we still joke about it. It was like we were being paid, but it's not why we did it. It was not what motivated us to do it. But to your question now, yeah, we're all paid to think, right? This is the social age, we're in the digital age, we're knowledge workers. Unless you're genuinely in a role where you're doing some repetitive task, which doesn't change at all, you know, production-like, I can't think of many jobs where that would be an accurate statement. You're going to have to think, you're going to have to apply yourself and solve a problem. And the other point that we talked about earlier is not everyone is a manager, okay? This is an important distinction too, because that tends to be like a very formal sort of, you know, role where you have certain responsibilities, okay? Accountabilities. But leaders can come from anywhere. Ideas can come from anywhere. And some of the best ideas come from the most unlikely places, okay? So that is typically how I tend to answer that type of question, or when I'm having that type of conversation.
Alejandro posted a nice picture. I think I'm going to make it my Zoom background.
Does that help, Mo? Is it? What do you think of that?
It's perfect. I need to go somewhere. I need to give that book as a gift to someone.
He was a past guest speaker at my meetup. He's a very interesting man.
Sath, don't you think someone saying a comment like that is, well, coming from a position of fear?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
There's obviously something scared them. Yeah.
It might be something that upset them in the past. That's the thing, because I've seen some really competent people when they want to abrogate responsibility for something, just say, I'm not paid to think. That's somebody else's job. And that's it.
I mean, hearing a statement like I'm not paid to think is a little bit tragic, right? In many respects. And it's sad, but again, I guess the thing it probably highlights is that there's clearly some sort of cultural or systemic problem, okay? That somebody would feel like that was a good response, or even something that they should be thinking of, or why do they feel that way? And the other thing that's important is, sadly, you know, a lot of us are creatures of habit, right? Okay, so we come to these things, or, you know, a lot of this community, wonderful community, we're active learners, we're open learners, we're taking these things back into our workplaces. I'm very comfortable being uncomfortable and being out of my comfort zone. Scott and I, again, something that we have in common and talk about a fair amount, but not everyone is. And I think what you're describing to me sort of translates into that. Okay, the response, the phrasing of it, yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate, but I think that's to me, that's what it translates into. Well, please don't give me something to do that I don't know how to do, because I'm not sure how to think about it. So they're not really in the mindset to go on this exploratory journey, right? Okay, and we, many of us on this call, yeah, I know a few of you on this call. I know that's what you do because I know you, and you can tell it in the way people communicate, what they say and what they don't say, and their behaviours. right? Your behaviours.
Muchas gracias.
I think the other thing, you've got an amazing superpower, which is your sense of humor. Use it. So in a situation where someone says something like that, say, I know you're hardly paid. And then everyone laughs. Yeah. Defuse awkward conversations with a bit of humor. You've got that charm. You can pull that off.
Okay, I don't want this to be the Mao presentation now. We can finish it. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much, Sath.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I really enjoyed it. Excellent questions. Thanks for your time and your attention, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the festival.
I'm knackered.
Hopefully see you again. Hopefully see you at some other sessions.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the evening. Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye, lovely people.
Yeah, thanks.